Welcome back to the Deep Dive. And today we're really getting into something fundamental.
We certainly are.
We're looking at a stack of sources that, they really challenge this modern idea that your morality, your virtue, it has to be seen to be real. It has to have an audience.
Exactly. Our mission really is to get a solid handle on the difference between genuine internal ethical practice with the Stoics, which is called discipline, and this other thing, this external ethical display or performance.
And we're diving deep into some very private reflections, aren't we? This isn't a Stoic textbook.
Not at all. We're mainly looking at Marcus Aurelius. And these weren't speeches. These were notes to himself. Self-reminders, written to keep his own internal axis straight while dealing with the pressure of, being the most powerful man on earth.
Okay, let's jump right in because this first idea is powerful. Aurelius kicks things off with a pretty serious warning.
He does.
He reminds himself that not every word spoken about morality, about ethics, actually comes from a moral place. The content, the statement itself, could be perfectly correct, but the motive for saying it out loud, that can change everything.
It's such a subtle, but I think a profound point. The sources aren't saying the advice is bad. They're saying the context of who's listening completely corrupts the impulse.
How so?
Well, you can say, we should all be more generous, and that's a true good statement. But the second you say it in front of a crowd, a little calculation starts in the back of your mind, doesn't it?
How does this make me look?
Precisely. That question enters the equation, and the purity of the original thought is, it's compromised.
And that's where the focus shifts. The whole point of Stoic self-interrogation is this constant internal check. Does this action, does this thought align with reason? That's the only yardstick.
Right. For the Stoic, it's all about reason, what the sources call Litri. It's a closed loop. It just needs you and your mind to verify if it's coherent. But the crowd, the audience, they don't do that.
No, they skip that part entirely.
They skip it and they go straight to the messenger. And they ask a totally different question, a much more damaging one.
Which is,
does this person actually live up to what they're saying? Is this person a hypocrite?
That feels like a natural human response, doesn't it? We're wired to check for hypocrisy.
Of course. But the sources are suggesting that when that consistency check becomes the main thing, the whole practice of ethics just goes off the rails. It becomes a trap.
A performance trap.
Yes, because if the idea only has value, if the messenger is morally perfect, then you stop focusing on the principle, which is timeless, and you start focusing on the person who is always flawed.
And ethics stops being a tool for you to improve yourself and becomes a tool for managing how other people see you.
You got it. And this is where the sources draw this incredibly sharp line, the distinction between the trainer and the performer.
This is a key concept. Let's really break these two down. First, the trainer.
The trainer is, you could say, the trainer of the soul. This is the person who accepts their own shortcomings. They accept the quiet, daily failures that nobody else ever sees.
And they don't need a pat on the back for doing the work.
They need zero external confirmation. They're just dedicated to the process, to what Marcus called resolute, this idea of training or forging. They work in silence. All of their focus is internal.
Okay, and then on the other side, we have the performer, the person who's chosen the stage.
The performer, by definition, needs those eyes on them. They are dependent on the audience. Without that constant validation, that external gaze, the entire image they've built just threatens to collapse.
Because it's an external thing. It's not held up from the inside.
It's a house of cards. They've externalized their accountability. So when you get into that mindset, ethics stops being a discipline and it becomes a defense, a shield.
A shield to protect your identity.
Exactly. The goal isn't moral growth anymore. The goal is just to protect yourself from being criticized.
Which immediately flips the entire Stoic objective on its head. The original goal is to live rightly, some go, to align your actions with reason.
But the performer's goal, it just subtly shifts to not being seen as wrong.
And that seems like a tiny change in wording, but the consequences are huge.
Catastrophic. Living rightly means you have to quietly confront yourself every single day, whether you get applause or not. It takes humility. Not being seen as wrong just means you have to say the right things when people are watching.
It's public relations, not philosophy.
It's PR, exactly. And the Stoic critique here isn't that this is evil, it's that it's weakening. It costs you your internal strength.
You're giving away your power.
It's the ultimate act of surrender. If your moral behavior depends on what other people think, you've just handed over your autonomy, the one thing you truly own, to the most unstable thing in the universe, public opinion.
And for someone like Marcus Aurelius, that's the definition of a weak mind. You've traded your inner stability for a bit of applause.
A devastating trade. So the punchline from this first part is really this. Morality doesn't need to be displayed to exist. If it needs an audience, then what you're protecting isn't morality, it's your image.
You're protecting your reputation, not your character. And that's a crucial difference.
Think about that little impulse. You do something good, and your immediate next thought is, I should tell someone about this, or I should post this. That's the moment. That's the shift from trainer to performer.
The moment the training stops and the exhausting job of image maintenance begins. But why? Why do we do this? It can't all be vanity.
It's not, and that's the perfect lead-in to our next section, looking at the root of this performance. It's all about fear and, crucially, self-deception.
Okay, so the sources are clear that the motive isn't malice. People aren't performing because they want to be evil.
Not at all. They do it because they're afraid. It's that deep human fear of being wrong in the eyes of others. The fear is social judgment, of being cast out.
So it's grounded in anxiety, not wickedness. The anxiety of not meeting the tribe's expectations.
Exactly. And when your mind is anxious, when it's uncertain of its own footing, it starts looking for an anchor, something outside of itself.
An external support.
Right. If you haven't trained your own reason to be a reliable guide, you look to the gaze of others as a substitute. The crowd's approval becomes this temporary anchor holding your shaky sense of self in place.
So morality stops being your internal compass, the Laban, and it becomes more like a public signpost. A tumbunkyu.
A signboard. That's the perfect image. You hang it up to signal, hey, I'm one of you. Don't misunderstand me. Don't cast me out. It's a quick way to get a badge that says I belong.
And the sources say this behavior just skyrockets during times of instability.
Oh, it flourishes. When society is uncertain, when the rules are changing, when people are terrified of being on the wrong side of an issue, this is when performative ethics becomes rampant.
Because shouting your rightness gives you a sense of safety much faster than quietly living it.
Infinitely faster. A declaration is instant. Training is slow, it's private, and it offers you no immediate social protection. The mind will almost always choose the quicker path to feeling safe.
And here's the really insightful part for me, the self-deception angle. Displaying your morality can be a way to avoid looking at yourself.
It's a brilliant psychological defense. If I talk enough about what's right, if I'm constantly aligning myself with the correct public positions, I can sort of drown out that quiet, nagging voice inside that knows where I'm actually falling short.
So the words become a cover.
A cover, yes. But here's the key. It's often a cover for ourselves, not just for other people. We're trying to convince our own conscience that we're okay by being loud about our principles.
This gets us to a really dangerous dynamic the sources point out. When your identity comes before your behavior.
Yes, this is so important. When we define ourselves as a moral person, we take that title, that identity, before we've actually done the hard work to earn it.
And once you've done that, once you've claimed that identity.
Any mistake you make, any flaw, isn't just a lapse in judgment anymore. It becomes a threat to your very identity, a threat to who you are.
Which forces you to become defensive.
Instantly. You start justifying, rationalizing, you go on the attack, you find fault in others. Anything to deflect from the fact that your behavior doesn't match the image you've created. The performance makes you rigid.
So it doesn't make you a better person, it just makes you a better defender of your image.
That's it exactly. And the Stoic antidote to this is so direct and so simple. It's just, don't rush to accept a title that your behavior is not yet strong enough to carry.
In other words, if you haven't earned the label of just or wise, then just train in silence. Don't claim the brand before you've built the product.
Because the title is a burden you have to defend. The action is just the path. This also helps explain that paradox of silence we sometimes see.
The idea that people who are truly serious about this stuff often talk about it the least.
Yes. Because every word you speak is another promise, another commitment you now have to live up to. It just adds to the pressure. The serious trainer is focused inward on the tough work of self-correction, not outward on telling everyone how great they are.
And the central illusion, the big lie we tell ourselves, is mistaking the feeling of being right for the work of becoming right.
That rush of validation you get from saying the right thing is like a drug. It feels good. The ego says, great, job done. But the actual hard work, the internal rewiring, that's been completely skipped over.
And all of this individual fear and self-deception is then amplified by the world around us, isn't it? Which brings us to society's reward system and its skewed incentives.
This is where we have to look at the larger structure, not with anger, but just with clear eyes. And the core Stoic insight here is, well, it's critical. Society doesn't reward internal ethics. It can't. It rewards the signs of ethics.
Why is that? Why can't a society reward the real thing?
Because a large system, a government, a company, a social movement, it has no way to measure what's happening in your soul. It can't audit your private struggles or your internal consistency.
So it has to rely on what it can see.
It has to. It relies on external indicators. The words you use, the actions that are visible, the public reaction. Since it can't measure the real thing, it's forced to reward the display as the next best thing.
And that creates a feedback loop, a vicious cycle.
A powerful one. What gets rewarded gets repeated. So the publicly approved behavior becomes a template, not for how to live a good life, but for how to be seen as living a good life.
And this is how a society develops a kind of ethical safety language.
Yes, it dictates, say this to be safe, stand over here to be on the right side. If you're silent on this issue, you're suspicious. It's all driven by that primal social fear. Being misunderstood, being isolated, being labeled and cast out.
And the sources say this leads to a disastrous shift. Our sense of duty gets replaced by the image of duty.
The fundamental question in our minds changes completely. It moves from, is this aligned with reason? Is this true? To, will this put me on the wrong side? Will people label me as one of the bad guys if I don't do this? And once that question changes, your entire moral compass is broken.
So ethics, which should be this private tool for character building, just becomes a social map.
A map for navigating social risk. It tells you where to stand and what to say to be safer, not necessarily to be righter.
And we have to be practical, right? Society needs quick signals. It can't wait for everyone's slow personal moral development.
It can't. An organization needs clear symbols for order and unity. And again, training is slow and invisible. Performance is fast and has witnesses. Given the choice, the individual navigating a complex society often chooses the path of convenience.
But then, isn't the Stoic approach irresponsible? If everyone is just silently training, who is setting the public example? Who is stabilizing society?
That is a fantastic question. And the Stoics aren't arguing for being passive or irresponsible. They believe that true, sustainable good in the world can only come from a foundation of internal integrity.
So they're not fighting against social norms just for the sake of it.
No, they just refuse to let those norms replace individual reason. The problem isn't the social norm. The problem is when you use it as a shortcut to avoid doing the hard internal work yourself.
You outsource your sense of pace to the crowd.
You place your tranquility in the hands of other people's reactions. And Marcus Aurelius knew this better than anyone. Reputation changes. Public opinion shifts like the wind. Building your character on that is like building a house on a sand dune during a hurricane.
Which brings us back to that illusion that just standing on the right side of a public issue is enough to fulfill your ethical duty.
And the Stoic view just flips that completely on its head. They would argue that one small ethical choice you make when no one is looking, like resisting the urge to take credit for someone else's idea, that has more real moral weight than a grand public declaration in front of 1,000 people.
Because the motive is pure. The audience is just your own reason.
And society can't measure that. But you know which standard you're living by. Society don't force us to be hypocrites. It just rewards performance more quickly and more obviously than it rewards quiet discipline. And that choice has a profound internal cost.
It does. Which leads us straight into the consequences of this life, the hidden toll. Let's talk about the exhaustion of the image.
This is where Marcus's notes get really personal, almost like a psychological journal. He observes that once you start displaying your ethics, the burden completely changes.
It's no longer the hard work of living right.
No, it becomes the crushing, unbearable weight of not being allowed to be wrong.
It's a huge distinction. Living rightly is hard, but possible. Living rightly while also looking perfect at all times
is nearly impossible. It's inhuman. You've signed up for a role, a Vidian that demands a level of perfection that just doesn't exist in human beings.
I can almost feel the tension that creates. The sources talk about this constant, low-level stress. Every stray thought, every doubt you have, every contradiction inside you. It all has to be suppressed.
It has to be hidden because it doesn't fit the role. And that's the mental tax. It's not some grand tragedy. It's a continuous, slow drain, the exhaustion of constantly being on guard.
You're constantly monitoring yourself, not to get better, but to avoid getting caught.
Exactly. And the sources suggest it's actually easier to endure the hard work of real training than the nonstop pressure of defending a facade. The trainer just has to fight their own flaws, the performer has to fight their flaws and everyone else's perception of them.
And the deepest cost in all of this seems to be the loss of honesty with yourself.
It has to be. The more you talk about how ethical you are, the less you dare to actually look at your own real shortcomings.
Because admitting a flaw would crack the image.
It would shatter the whole thing. And when you can no longer admit you're imperfect, even to yourself, ethics stops being a path to freedom and it becomes a prison. Your own mind becomes a jail.
The performance forces your mind to become rigid, defensive.
It does. The internal question isn't, is this the right thing to do anymore? It becomes, will this action damage my image? And the moment that second question takes over, your reason has been totally compromised. The ego is now in charge.
And since the Stoics knew that no one is perfect, a system that demands perfection is doomed to fail.
It's demanding something unnatural. And in that desperate, exhausting effort to defend the perfect image, the very first thing you sacrifice is honesty with yourself. You stop looking inward with clarity.
So the punchline is that when your morality is just an image to protect, your inner life stops training. It just switches to defense mode.
And a mind that is always on the defensive can't see the truth. And if it can't see the truth, it can never live a righteous life.
So if that defensive posture is the problem, we have to talk about how to reverse it. How do we get ethics off the stage and back into the gym? Let's move to the practical side. The path to silent training.
This part is so usable because it's all about action. But the actions are, well, they're uncomfortable. It starts with a simple principle. Not every true thing needs to be said.
And even when it is said, you have to be brutally honest with yourself about why you're saying it.
Exactly. Is this to serve the truth? Or is this to serve my ego? If it's the ego, the correct Stoic choice is silence, even if the statement itself is true.
So what are the actual practices?
The sources outline two main ones, and they're both very counterintuitive for our culture. The first is to stop self-definition.
What does that mean in practice? We love to define ourselves by our virtues.
It means you stop using ethical labels for yourself. You stop saying, I am a principled person, or I am a generous person. The Stoics argued these labels don't actually make you better, they just create a heavy burden that you now have to defend.
So the goal is to act justly, but never to claim the title of a just person.
Yes. The moment you claim the title, your energy shifts from doing the work to guarding the brand. So you focus on the verb, the acting, not the noun, the label.
Okay, that's a big one. What's the second practice?
This one is even harder, I think. It's to allow for unvalidated righteousness.
Meaning?
It means you have to give yourself permission to do the right thing when no one is watching, and to be okay with the fact that you will get zero credit for it, no applause, no confirmation.
The only reward is that quiet, internal feeling of what?
Of, I have not betrayed myself. Of, I have remained consistent with my own reason. And that feeling, for a Stoic, isn't exciting. It's just solid. It's the foundation.
And that stability is the real prize.
Yep.
Not the applause.
It's the ultimate prize. It's the source of real psychological freedom. This, of course, means you have to practice a different kind of silence, not a silence born of fear.
Right. The performer is silent because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing.
But the trainer is silent because they recognize that speaking would only be for self-affirmation. It wouldn't actually improve their behavior. Marcus constantly told himself, don't use your words to make up for where your actions fall short.
And this all leads to maybe the hardest practice of all, especially today. Accepting that you will be misunderstood.
This is the real test. If you only act rightly when you're sure you'll be understood correctly, then you've given up all your power. How other people see your actions is completely outside of your control.
So if someone sees my quiet discipline and calls it indifference or apathy, I just have to let them.
You have to, because their opinion doesn't change the reality of your action. If you need them to approve of you to feel okay, you'll be chasing their validation forever. True tranquility comes when you can endure being misunderstood.
And finally, this path requires us to accept our own incompleteness.
You are never done. Ethics isn't a destination you arrive at, it's a continuous practice. Every single day you have to make course corrections. Performance tries to freeze a perfect image of you. Training keeps your mind flexible enough to admit you were wrong 5 minutes ago and to fix it now.
There's a real sense of relief in that, isn't there? The sources talk about the freedom you feel when you no longer have to prove you're a good person.
It's what they call the Stoic promised land. It's not happiness, not admiration. It's just the state of not being disturbed when other people get you wrong. That is genuine stability.
When you drop the burden of protecting the image, you finally have the energy to do the real work of discipline.
And that freedom is everything. True freedom isn't being praised. It's not being controlled by your need for praise. noise.
So the only standard that matters is that internal one. Did I betray my own reason?
That's it. If the answer is no, then no amount of misunderstanding can truly hurt you. And if the answer is yes, then all the praise in the world is just empty noise.
So we've really traced the two paths. The path of the audience, which is all about validation and leads to exhaustion, and the path of reason, which is about silent discipline and leads to real internal stability.
And the call to action from these sources couldn't be clearer. It's about putting ethics back where it belongs. Not on a stage, not in a social media post, but in the small, unseen choices you make every single day.
Which leaves us, and you, with one final, very pointed question. This is the ultimate test from the Stoics, the one that cuts through all the noise.
Ask yourself this. If no one was looking, if no one was judging, if no one would ever name your virtue, would you still choose that action?
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Until next time.